What I have here are three groups of different defects. The first group is over-rubbing the bevel, which creates the bounce defect, and here I've used a black pen to define it. The second group, these are created by not having any bevel contact at all, so the nose of the gouge is scoring the work. And the third is by using a dull tool, using the correct technique, but with the tool being dull, it's torn out the end grain on each one of these three blocks. This group of defects and this group of defects are directly linked. They're created by left-hand control. Now, when I'm turning right-handed, my right hand controls the gouge to form the cut, the shape, and all the motions. In this case, my left hand was creating the over-rubbing of the bevel, which can't be done with the right hand. And so it influenced the cut and created the defect. The same with this group. This is where the left hand took control by allowing the bevel to come off the surface and pulling the blade around from the front. Again, the left hand controlling the tool, creating the defect on these. Correct technique was used for this group. However, a dull tool was used and possibly a lathe speed too slow and a cutting too fast. That's what creates the torn grain when using correct technique. Here I have the three different defects you can get cutting directly across end grain. Although we are actually slicing through side grain fibers, what is left behind is end grain. And here we have the first defect, which is a bounce defect created by over-rubbing the bevel. Secondly is we have one here that was created with score marks, that is no bevel contact, therefore the gouge was pushed across with the assistance of the left hand. And thirdly is correct technique and a dull tool, cutting too fast, too slow lathe speed. Could be a combination of all three or just one of them. All of those defects can create this torn grain. So the first one I have here is bouncing across the surface. Now this particular cut here, I don't have a tailstock in the way, and so therefore I have the choice of setting up the tool rest in two different orientations. If I set it with parallel with the lathe, that would work if the tailstock was in here, because I simply can't set my tool rest the other way. Now, here when I'm cutting across, the problem is there's a traverse, so as I cut across, the tool needs to move to the right, which means if I leave my fingers here, they are creating the bounce by restricting the tool's movement as I glide across. So we'll do that particular cut first and show you how to avoid the bounce there, and then we'll do the option of moving the tool rest round and showing you how it becomes a lot easier, but you can still create the bounce on this surface with the tool rest in the optimum position, which is parallel with the cut. I'm going to cut across this face with the tool rest in this position here, parallel with the lathe. As I get towards the end, that's going to start putting some pressure on this bar. It's 1/2 inch in diameter, but I'm going to stick with this size. The main thing is to stop the flex and vibration from the steel bending very slightly under pressure of cutting, is to ensure I cut slower and less volume. Now the other thing I've got to do is I start the entry cut here, the tool is going to want to skate sideways. I'm going to place my thumb on the tool rest, fingers wrapped in front and behind. Now, this is a great starting position, but a terrible position once the cut is started. Once the bevel's in contact, my fingers are preventing the tool from sliding and therefore will induce the bouncing. So we don't want the bouncing on this, so I need to, once I'm in the cut and safe that it won't skid sideways, slide my left hand out the way and then move my body with the cut. This is not a curved cut, so it's a body contact cut with the handle. The other two cuts, the sphere cut, the bowl cut, I didn't use body contact to form the shape. I used swinging of the handle, sliding on the bevel. Now, I must slide on the bevel here, not rub on the bevel, so no additional pressure needed onto the bevel, just weight down onto the tool rest. By ensuring the gouge could slide across the tool rest while gliding the bevel on the surface, as able to perform the cut very well, We didn't get a skid on entry by using my thumb at the initial point to prevent the little skid sideways, but then releasing it and letting it slide. So we've removed the bounce marks here. I'm going to put them back in momentarily to show you how it's created by simply not removing my left hand in time. So the cut started well, almost no bounce marks the first eighth of an inch, but soon after my fingers, because they were used to help control or prevent the skid at the beginning of the cut, they then work against me and they were restricting the tool's movement and therefore adding pressure to the bevel, creating the bounce, and then it got out of control, and at this stage I simply stopped. So as my left hand was controlling or affecting the cut, preventing the tool from gliding, therefore I end up with a defect. Let's fix this defect by moving the tool rest around the other way. This is a much more comfortable position to cut with. That doesn't mean you won't get bounced, so there are some things we have to take note of to ensure we still get the good clean cut across the face. So here I've set my tool rest up in a much more comfortable position. If it's a long tool rest, try and push it this way because my body would be too far back. Here I'm using a relatively short tool rest. And I can't put my hand underneath to pinch the tool here. It simply won't fit. It must go on top. And this is where we tend to, with our left hand, because we're very strong with it, is we pull it in with our fingers again onto the bevel, creating that defect. So it's important that I pinch the tool at the beginning to prevent the skid, although it's less likely to skid when it's cutting parallel with the tool rest. And then once I'm in the cut, is just to relax my left hand, holding it down, not pulling it into the surface. If I just hold it neutrally, and at the very end, I slow down the cut by gripping the tool. I can finish right on center, not lunge through. I'll end up with a controlled, clean cut across the end grain with bevel contact, but gliding, not rubbing. Much easier to clean up the face with the tool rest parallel to the cut rather than the tool rest parallel to the bed of the lathe. And here, simply gliding across, you notice I relaxed my left, just adding weight, and then clenched a little bit towards the end to slow the tool down to finish right in the center. So here we have the cut across the face of the end grain with no bevel contact, creating all the spirals, tearing the grain, and also damaging the tool. Over-rubbing the bevel doesn't generally damage the tool, but this will definitely damage the cutting edge. So even if you repair this afterwards with another clean cut, you've probably damaged the cutting edge and now starting to lift the fibers. So with the tool rest in this position, it is actually quite difficult not to get started wrong, but to end up wrong. If the bevel contact is off and there's a gap, let's show that gap. If the bevel contact is not in place and there's a gap right here, then to keep that up all the way across becomes very difficult because the overhang is just incredibly long. So let's put the tool rest in the optimum position for this and show you how the defect was created. Now cutting across here, if I take the bevel off, then I am forced to get it to move to push with my left thumb. If I don't, it'll either stall or skid sideways. So let's demonstrate that first. And after I've done this a couple of times, I'm going to go and resharpen the tool because it will not clean up these fibers once it's dull. So we could clearly see that without the left adding some controlling factor of pushing it across, then this cut can't be performed without bevel contact. Gouges and chisels are always very aggressive on end grain, and here, without the bevel being in contact, it can't be controlled from the rear with the right hand at all. We do need the third support. We have our tool rest, which is a very obvious support. No cut can be done without a tool rest. We have to hold the handle for leverage and to control the motion. But once the bevel comes off on pure end grain, it is not going to stay still. It will always skid sideways. So here I've definitely damaged the tool. In fact, let's take a quick cut across the face and I'll show you that we don't improve the surface very much with this dull tool. So what I have here is correct technique. Everything was in the correct position. However, as I perform the cut, when we stop and look, we have torn fibers here on the end grain. We can feel it's raised, which is the same scenario as this guy, just not quite as dull. We can see this one's not quite as torn on here, but a couple more cuts and we're going to end up with this scenario where we're pulling out the fibers really badly. Can't be fixed with sandpaper. So I'm going to sharpen and repair this one the same I'd repair this particular piece, which is sharp tool, everything set up correct, correct feed rate, correct lathe speed, and that'll give us clean, untorn fibers. So setting everything up correct with a sharp tool, I was able to cut across the face, eliminate the torn grain, and end up with a very clean piece of wood. Something worth noting about having the tool rest going parallel with the cut here, it is essential to have the correct height. You'll notice I was being very critical on setting the height up correctly because there is a potential for an accident here when set up incorrectly. So I'm going to demonstrate what can actually happen, but I'm not going to obviously emulate the accident, but I'm going to show you that it is essential when the tool rest is parallel. It's not so essential when it's running along the bed length to set the height exactly right, but it is here, and let's show you why. So by setting the tool rest height incorrectly low, and you can get a similar effect cutting too high, I actually got a decrease in quality of finish because I wasn't cutting above or on center line. I was basically scraping and tearing with the nose. It wasn't slicing as good. So as I cut across the face here, you saw that the tool jumped out, and that isn't something I created deliberately. It happens because I'm no longer able to cut and the tool is forced out. And where the accident happens in this scenario is that if we're pushing too hard, the tool will lunge past center, catch on the other side, pull the tool back from your fingers over and directly on top. So it is essential to set the tool rest height correct for this particular cut. If we're going in from the side, it's a little bit different because there's some forgiveness here. If I'm a little bit too high, I can point down. If I'm a little bit too low, I can point up. Not going to be any catch situation in that particular position as long as we pass through the center. But it isn't possible to pass through the center when the tool rest is set at the wrong height because I can't reach it no matter what I do. So we must set it at the correct height, and that allows us to cut and pass right through the center here without any problems of getting that lunging past center because we're pushing hard, the wood's not cutting, catching on the end grain the other side, throwing it back. One thing that affects straight cuts but doesn't affect the outside of a bowl if it's convexed, and also the sphere cut is also convexed, is the length of the bevel. I was using a 1/2 inch bowl gouge with a reduced bevel length, so the heel was ground off here. So this 1/2 inch gouge has a reduced length bevel. The length of the bevel at the nose is about 1/8 of an inch. So on this straight surface, it won't create any scoring marks where the heel of the bevel catches on the corner as it comes into the cut and makes the nose create little dig marks, the length of the bevel. Now on this particular gouge, I've gone slightly larger. This is a 5/8 diameter, and the bevel hasn't been reduced enough in length. It does have some of the heel off, but it's been resharpened several times without additional grinding off the heel. So the problem is, this is concave, this is straight. It's going to leave ridge marks across the face of the piece, which, although the piece will be cut technically correct and we'll end up with good clean grain, we will have ridges created by this hollow grind and this heel catching on the corner and marking the surface. As I cut across the face there, you'll have seen a score mark from the heel of the bevel created, repeating itself across the face. They're not too distinguishable once I've switched off the lathe, but they are there. And they're marks that are every length of the bevel. And it just keeps repeating itself. As I went across, there's a mark, another mark, another mark. So I'll do it one more time and I'll stop when we can clearly see one of the marks appear. The reason the mark appeared comes from the heel of the bevel and the concave grind. As I'm sliding across here straight, we're taking a concave surface over that. The heel comes into contact with the edge, pushes the nose in momentarily, and then it repeats it again and again. So this is one of the reasons we want to have a shortened bevel. This one is about 1/4 inch long, simply too long. We generally want about 1/8 of an inch or slightly less. Never super, super short though, because that has other problems when it comes to resharpening the tool. And therefore, with a shortened bevel, the wood is not marked in the same way. And remember, this is end grain, and therefore to sand out those little ridges, it's fairly difficult because they're below the surface, and therefore the whole surface has to be skimmed off to remove those little ridges created by too long a hollow bevel. If it was a flat ground bevel, it would not be an issue.